Thank you so much for your time, Bapak Hasyim. It's a real pleasure and privilege to have you here in Hong Kong.
You're very welcome, Brian.
Thank you. So I just want to start with a question on Indonesia's economy. So I've just seen, the fresh off the record GDP results coming in, with the Q1 results in terms of GDP growth beating expectations. And it's clear that Indonesia is currently adopting, under President Jokowi, a balanced growth strategy that combines increased public spending with commodity-driven exports. Now, the question I have for you is, where do you see the Indonesian economy over the next 5 years or so? And what exactly will be the key priorities for the incoming administration under President Prabowo?
His main priority is basically eradication of poverty. I mean, that's a very laudable goal, and some people say impossible, but we think we have a very good chance of doing that. So poverty eradication, poverty reduction first, and ultimately eradication. So that's his number one priority. There are several ways of achieving that. One is the free meal program that I think you know about. That's his major platform. It's been his idea for 18 years, even before we set up our party, Gerindra. We believe, the new administration believes, and basically, Brian, the new administration is a continuation of the current administration. It's a continuation of current policies, but we think we can actually achieve, we believe there's much more potential. I mean, 5% is very good. But we believe we can do much more than 5%.
What do you see to be the main structural obstacles thus far in attempts to alleviate poverty, and how would these structural obstacles be overcome under the new administration? Will there be a need for a change in policies, or is continuity sufficient, really?
The main obstacle to achieving our goals is the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy, corruption is still endemic. It's very much, and that's something that Jokowi has done a lot to combat. But we think we can do more.
What are the key prongs of ameliorating corruption?
Well, one of the things that we see, and we want to, is actually to improve the welfare of the law enforcement agencies. Judges in Indonesia are grossly underpaid. Grossly underpaid judges, policemen, the prosecutors. So what we want to do is actually remove the causes, let's say the necessity for being corrupt. When government officials cannot educate their own children, they cannot afford to educate their own children, cannot afford to send their children to university for basic university education, then there's a problem there. My brother wants to alleviate that by increasing the salaries and the welfare benefits of the civil service, but especially of law enforcement.
On that note, improving or lifting the wages of civil servants, covering free school meals, and also investing en masse into public infrastructure, all of these are eminently reasonable and noble strategies that nevertheless would indeed cost or take up a fairly sizable chunk of the national budget and also induce further expenditure down the line. Do you foresee any potential stress or concerns with regards to the fiscal health of the Indonesian government in relation to these projects?
Actually, I don't. And Prabowo doesn't see either. I mean, there's a lot of potential, as I said earlier. Now, for instance, the revenue ratios, the revenue to GDP ratios. Indonesia is one of the lowest, the revenue to GDP ratios in the world. We have the second lowest debt levels of the G20 countries. The only country lower than us in debt is Russia, the Russian Federation. And we're number 19, which is actually quite good. So there's in terms of the total national debt, public debt and private debt is actually quite low. So we have a lot of potential in terms of managing our debt, increasing our debt prudently. And the World Bank has confirmed that. They have said, Mr. Hasyim, we have the tools. They said the use of AI, artificial intelligence, use of IT, hardware, to actually increase the revenue. The revenue including tax, including royalties from all the commodities that we export, right? Excise taxes, cigarettes. Indonesians are notoriously cigarette smokers. I don't smoke, by the way, but many Indonesians do. And then, of course, then other sources like import duties, and our revenue ratio is very low. So that's the potential.
Now, under President Jokowi, there's been an active attempt to bolster foreign direct investment to stimulate interest of, again, foreign businesses coming into Indonesia and setting up their presence by rolling back in a lot of the unnecessary bureaucratic clutter and regulations that had been in place previously. So my question here is, to what extent do you see a shift in terms of the role of the state vis-a-vis the private sector in the economy under your brother as compared with his predecessor? Or do you see, again, a continuity on that front, despite perhaps President Jokowi adopting a more explicitly pro-market position and orientation in his policies in Indonesia?
If we have to and we want to mitigate poverty, we have to use the power of the state to do that. It's not, the private sector is not motivated nor equipped to be able to answer those questions. For instance, the free meal program, and that's a $30 billion program. We intend to feed 78 million children, school children, preschool children, and even 4 million babies in the mother's womb. We believe that's the key. Nutrition at the start, before they're born, that's the start. That will determine basically their fate in the future. And that requires state intervention. I mean, $30 billion, the private sector couldn't do that. Some people say it's socialistic, and Prabowo says, well, I mean, if it's socialistic, let it be socialistic. But I mean, let's identify the problem. What are the solutions? And if they're socialistic solutions, as opposed to free market, new liberal solutions, then so be it.
And I guess the question, before I turn to foreign policy, the last question on the economy is, where do you see Indonesia in relation to the EV race, electric vehicles, and also critical raw minerals at large?
Before I answer that question, I just want to point out that our population is very, very young. 56% of our population is under the age of 35. We have what's called the demographic bonus. And so that's going to be, that's a huge potential for us. Now, on the potential for, let's say, EVs in the energy transition, Indonesia aspires to be a manufacturing base. We want to be in a manufacturing base. We just don't want to be a exporter and producer of raw materials. We want to have, and we're very happy to see that China has been very, very active in actually investing in nickel smelters and actually adding value to otherwise lower value commodities like nickel. So yes, the aim is to have a manufacturing hub, and we're trying to attract Chinese companies. We're trying to attract Japanese companies, American companies, Tesla. Our government's been trying to woo Mr. Musk and Tesla. That's the aspiration.
As we know, China has become an incredibly preeminent economic player on a world stage, whether it be as a source of FDI, as a source of companies with technologies, with personnel, especially in advanced manufacturing, and of course, as a gigantic market unto its own. And yet historically, China and Indonesia haven't always had the easiest of relations, or the most smoothest of relations, especially given in certain segments of the Indonesian population, anti-Chinese sentiments, or dare I say, Sinophobic sentiments, so to speak. So I guess, to what extent do you see the increasing economic interconnectivity between China and Indonesia as a force that might lead to more friction and tensions between the ethnic Chinese and the non-ethnic Chinese segments of the Indonesian population, and how could these tensions be managed and also ameliorated going forward?
One of the reasons for social resentment is the economic inequalities. I mean, it's very evident that the richer classes, the wealthier classes, often are either ethnic Chinese, ethnic Indian, ethnic Arab, but that's the source of the tension is the economic inequality, in my opinion. So if you can mitigate that economic inequality, if you can eradicate the sources of poverty, then that's going to become a long way to be reducing that resentment,
Let's talk a bit about China and the US. The question I have is, Indonesia under President Jokowi has sought to position itself as a relatively neutral and friendly to all party. On one hand, of course, there was an elevation of the US-Indonesian relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership last year. But that was also coupled with at least two face-to-face meetings in the second half of 2023 between President Xi Jinping and President Jokowi. So I suppose the question here is, to what extent do you see this balancing, hedging, or this neutrality-centered act? Can Indonesia really stay out of it, or are you concerned about possible escalation, say, in the South China Seas?
It's the traditional Indonesian foreign policy since the founding of our republic in 1945. proclamation. We got our sovereignty in 1950, and we've had 74 years of continuous neutrality. I mean, we call it non-alignment. It's a euphemism for neutrality. We're one of the few neutral states in the world, by the way. I mean, Sweden is no longer neutral. Finland is no longer neutral. They're members of NATO. It's questionable about Switzerland. Indonesia is a neutral country, a non-aligned neutral country. We intend to be. And yes, I think it's, dare I say, inevitable. The tensions will escalate. It depends who's going to be the next president of the United States. And it's a matter of style over substance, isn't it? I don't think we are relatively neutral. We are completely neutral. We're friends with everybody. Prabowo, my brother, likes to this Chinese saying. Apparently, it's a Chinese saying: "One enemy too many, 1,000 friends too few." Apparently, it's from Taoism. Apparently, and we believe that. We believe that. So there will be pressures. There will be pressures to hew to one side or the other, and I think we'll be able. We've done it for 74 years. You know, we've resisted that.
On the role of ASEAN, are you more hopeful that maybe it's not about the disunity or the fragmentation that we can take away from all of this, but that maybe ASEAN is just fluid, it's dynamic, and it's open to aligning with all parties, such that it is therefore overarchingly aligned with no one? So what do you make of ASEAN's positioning in relation to Sino-American tensions?
ASEAN is not a monolith. It's not a strategic or military alliance. It's a forum for discussion, frankly. It's basically a forum for discussion. And there are economic, programs common to all of the members, and not so common to all the members. But member states have their own, particular national interest. I mean, Cambodia is very close to the People's Republic. The Philippines is closer to the United States. Indonesia is neutral. But there were, as you said, different power arrangements within ASEAN and with individual member states.
Let's talk about values. And this is a question that comes to mind largely because in many ways I see the existing discourse centered around or in engaging with Indonesia as always speculation concerning what governance under your brother or governance previously in a past in history would look like, in relation to Indonesia's trajectory. Where do you see the role of values in terms of assessing domestic governance, political legitimacy, and also international relations?
When people talk about units of values, and values in general, what are these values? I mean, you have values, human rights, political parties, the liberal democracy, those are certain values, right? And then you have other values, social values, right to have abortion, LGBTQ values. Those are values which are being often imposed by Western countries on non-Western countries. There was an instance of a year ago, when certain EU embassies were flying the flag of the EU, which was illegitimate, of their the national state, which was illegitimate, and there was rainbow flags. Rainbow flags were being flown on the masts of EU embassies. Now that is a particular affront to the Indonesian people. LGBTQ values are not accepted in Indonesia, nor are they accepted in many other countries in the world. So when Western countries try to impose, it's not only political values, political human rights, political rights, there are also social rights which are not universal. They try to impose their values. You have to accept same-sex marriage. You have to accept equality among the different sexual preferences. Well, that's not on. It may be possible in 50 years or 100 years, but the Indonesian people overwhelmingly reject it. And many Asian countries overwhelmingly reject it, and many African countries reject it as well. So, so I think that's quite a firm answer to that question, isn't it?
You've been a businessman, an investor, a financier, but you've also worked with think tanks, supported research, advocated and talked about Indonesia, both domestically and abroad. What's the most important life lesson you've learned throughout all these years that you keep to heart as a motto?
I try to be, getting money, making money, is very important. Profit is very important, but what's very important is how you spend the profit. In my opinion, I spend a lot of my personal fortune on wildlife conservation, on women's empowerment. I help my wife in women's empowerment, children's protection. We are very active in fighting human trafficking. That's also because of my personal fortune, of the family fortune. Non-government finances, non-government money. So I think it's very important for businessmen to be very socially responsible.
We're currently in Hong Kong, and I suppose many would ask, what brings you here to Hong Kong, and what do you make of this very city? Can you tell us about your Hong Kong connection there?
Yeah, so I came here at the age of 6 with my family, my siblings, my mother, my father was on and off in Hong Kong, came to visit us often, and I have very fond memories of Hong Kong in the 1960s. So 1962, we spent 2 years here, and I went to school here. I went to the Glenealy's junior school at I'm told it still exists, and my sister went to King George V, KG5. We have very fond memories of Hong Kong. I used to go to Sheko Beach, play in the sand. I still remember. I think we still have photos of when I was 6, 7 years old playing, making sandcastles in Sheko Beach. So fond memories. And I've been coming to Hong Kong for what? Over 60 years.
Past few years have certainly been interesting for Hong Kong, to say the least, and many in our younger generations would often ask, where's the future of Hong Kong? How can we find a role, and where's the mojo, in that Hong Kong could regain in order to play a role continually in being an international, cosmopolitan and dynamic city? So I guess the question I have for you is, Bapak, what would you say to our youngsters? What should drive them, and what should be the source of hope for Hong Kong youth today?
Well, I see Hong Kong as the bridge between, in my case, between Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and China. I think Hong Kong serves a very valuable, plays a valuable role. Culturally, I think, it's much easier for us from Southeast Asia to communicate with people in Hong Kong. Obviously, the English language, English culture, and so forth. With the rise of China, a greater position in the world economy and world politics, I think Hong Kong will serve a much greater role. I think it's going to be more and more important for countries like Indonesia and the member states of ASEAN, in my opinion.
The winds of change are blowing wild and free, as the very famous song goes. And I guess my question is, can Hong Kong adapt? I mean, what are the key priorities that you think the Hong Kong government should prioritize when it comes to engaging better with Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia? What aren't we doing enough of right now?
I really don't know the answer to that, because I really don't. I mean, I'm satisfied with the way Hong Kong is. I mean, I met your chief executive, Mr. John Lee, yesterday, and he says, increasing relations with and having wider relations with ASEAN and particularly with Indonesia is one of his major priorities. So I welcome that. I mean, the Indonesian government welcomes that, and I think Indonesian business welcomes that. So I can't see what more you can do. We talked about a greater exchange of educational exchange. I asked Mr. Lee to take in perhaps 5 of your universities in the world's top 100, which is amazing, frankly. And I asked him whether that Hong Kong can take in more Indonesian students. And Prabowo, our new president, is very keen on what is called STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and you in Hong Kong are very strong in STEM. So I see a much greater role, especially in education and educational exchange.
That's brilliant. And of course, it behoves me to ask you a question, to conclude our wonderful conversation. What is your favorite food item from Hong Kong, Pak Hasyim? And also, where's your favorite go-to spot and place in Hong Kong?
So I've been coming here for over 60 years. So obviously I like the Chinese food here. I mean, you come to Hong Kong and you like to have Chinese food. But to be very honest with you, my priority in the last few days was eating oysters. I love oysters. And here, I mean, I don't want to promote a certain hotel, but in the hotel that I'm staying at the moment, there's a wonderful seafood restaurant specializing in lobster and oysters and seafood. So at the moment, that's my priority in terms of culinary, But I like Chinese food, so I'm particularly keen on Sichuan food, because it's very spicy. Indonesians like spicy food. I like Sichuan food, but I like all Chinese food in general.
Indeed.
This is a heaven. This is a heaven for foodies like me, you know.
With that mindset, the world's our oyster. Thank you so much, Papak. Thank you.
Brian, good.
What a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. As the world's fourth most populous nation, Indonesia is most certainly a tour de force to be reckoned with immense potential, not just as an economic powerhouse, but also as a geostrategic player. Speaking with Penasaran Hasyim has enabled us to gain a glimpse into what President Prabowo's policies and program is likely to look like for the upcoming few years, but also into the insights and life experiences of someone who has straddled the academic, the business, and the political spheres. Regardless of whether or not we agree or disagree with the government's policies in Indonesia, it is absolutely vital that we take the time to observe, to listen, and to learn. Can Indonesia overcome the structural barriers of corruption and bureaucracy to become a vibrant, flourishing economy that thrives not just on a basis of advanced manufacturing and exports, but also on a highly urbanized and literate middle class? That is a question that only time will tell, and we must wait and see.